The boardroom was silent, so silent I could hear the hum of the air conditioning over the sound of my own heartbeat. My boss, Mark Benton, leaned back in his chair, that smug grin plastered across his face as if the world already belonged to him. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, imagining the applause, the praise, the promotion. But then, the CEO cleared his throat. "Interesting," Mr. Foster said, flipping through the stack of contracts. "Because every single signature here belongs to—" He paused, raising his eyes. "Emily Carter." The room shifted. Executives whispered, chairs squeaked, and Mark's grin, his arrogant, condescending grin, evaporated in an instant. He had mocked me, called me dead weight in a voice note he never meant for me to hear. He had planned to, steal my project, my months of sleepless nights. But instead of confronting him then, I had waited. I had let him dig his own grave. And now, in front of the entire board, the truth stood undeniable. The fraud was exposed. The mask had shattered. For the first time, everyone saw who Mark Benton really was. I used to think that working hard was enough. That merit would always rise to the surface. Like cream in coffee. That's what my father taught me growing up in our modest home in suburban Dallas, where he'd return each evening with calloused hands and tired eyes, but never a complaint. "Your work speaks for you when your voice cannot," he'd say. But 3 years at Lone Star Dynamics had taught me otherwise. My cubicle was strategically positioned in the corner of the 27th floor, not close enough to the windows to enjoy the Dallas skyline, but not far enough from the conference rooms to avoid hearing every celebration that I was never invited to join. I'd decorated it with minimal personal touches, a small succulent that refused to die despite my erratic watering schedule, a framed engineering degree from Texas Tech that cost me 6 years and a mountain of student debt, and a photo of my parents at their 30th anniversary dinner. "Morning, Emily," Jordan Wells said, popping his head over the partition. Jordan was one of the few people at Lone Star who actually saw me. Not just looked at me. Saw me. "Ready for the team meeting? I heard Mark's on the warpath today." I sighed, gathering my tablet and the color-coded notes I'd prepared for the logistics. Proposal I'd been developing for 6 months. As ready as I'll ever be. The conference room was already filling up when we arrived. The usual suspects huddled around Mark. Tiffany from marketing with her immaculate blowout and calculating eyes, Derek from finance who laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny, and Vince from operations who seemed to exist solely to echo Mark's opinions. I called them the cronies in my head. Never out loud, of course. I wasn't stupid. Mark Benton stood at the head of the table, 42 years old with the kind of confidence that only comes from a lifetime of doors opening before you even knock. His tailored navy suit probably cost more than my monthly rent, and his smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at me. "Team," he announced, clapping his hands together as if we were kindergartners needing to be corralled. "Let's get started. We've got a big quarter ahead." I sat quietly, tablet open to my presentation notes, waiting for my turn to speak. The Southwest Distribution Network proposal was my baby. 6 months of data analysis, vendor negotiations, and innovative routing solutions that could save the company millions. I missed dinners with friends, canceled 2 dates, and worked through a nasty flu to complete it. Today was supposed to be my day to present the initial findings. "Emily," Mark said, my name sounding foreign in his mouth. "Coffee's running low. Would you mind?" I froze, feeling all eyes turned to me. "But I thought I was presenting the logistics proposal today. It's on the agenda." Mark waved his, hand dismissively. "We're running behind. We'll circle back if there's time." He turned to the room. "So, about the Q3 projections?" I felt my cheeks burn as I stood up, tablet still clutched in my hand. This wasn't the first time, and everyone knew it. I caught Jordan's sympathetic glance as I walked out, his eyes saying what his mouth couldn't. This isn't right. In the break room, I filled the coffee carafe with shaking hands, swallowing the bitter taste of humiliation. It wasn't just about making coffee. It was about being rendered invisible, being told implicitly that my work, my time, my expertise were dispensable. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification from Mark, probably wondering where his coffee was. I pulled it out, ready to respond, but instead found a voice note. Unusual, since Mark typically sent terse, command-like texts. I pressed play. "She's dead weight, guys." Mark's voice slightly slurred, probably from the after-work drinks I wasn't invited to. "Carter thinks she's going places with that logistics proposal. It's cute, really. Laughter in the background. I recognized Tiffany's high-pitched giggle. I've already told Foster it's my project. By next month, it'll be my name on the presentation to the board, my promotion in the bag. She'll still be fetching coffee, wondering what happened. More laughter. Then, shit, wrong chat. The recording ended abruptly. I stood motionless, the coffee forgotten, the phone heavy in my hand. My first instinct was to march back into that meeting room, slam my resignation letter on the table, and tell Mark exactly where he could put his coffee. The fantasy played vividly in my mind. The shocked faces, the momentary satisfaction of standing up for myself. But then my father's voice echoed in my head. Strategy beats rage every time, Emily. I looked down at my phone again, at the voice note that wasn't meant for me. Evidence. Ammunition. I took a deep breath and pressed the save button. Then, with steady hands, I finished preparing the coffee, arranged the cups on a tray, and walked back to the meeting room with my face carefully composed. I placed a cup in front of Mark with a polite smile. Thanks, Emily, he said without looking up, already moving on to the next agenda item. He had no idea what had just happened, no idea that everything had changed. I returned to my seat, opened my tablet, and began typing a new note. Not about logistics or distribution networks, but about justice, about patience, about the perfect moment to strike. Mark had declared war, but he didn't know it yet. He thought I was invisible. And for now, that was my greatest advantage. That night, I didn't sleep. My apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a complex with thin walls and temperamental plumbing, felt suffocating. I paced between the kitchenette and the living room, replaying Mark's voice note until I had memorized every inflection, every chuckle in the background. Dead weight. The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I'd spent my entire life fighting against that label. The quiet girl, easily overlooked, perpetually underestimated. At Lone Star, I'd hoped things would be different. I had a master's degree, excellent recommendations, and ideas that could genuinely transform the company's operations. Yet here I was, 3 years in, still being sent for coffee, while Mark prepared to steal my work. At 3 a.m., I made a decision. I opened my laptop and pulled up the company's internal directory. Marissa Lynn, head of legal. I'd met Marissa only twice, once during my orientation and again at last year's holiday party, where she'd complimented my analysis of a contract dispute. She wasn't part of Mark's social circle. She reported directly to the CEO. And most importantly, she had a reputation for being meticulously fair. I drafted an email, deleted it, drafted another. How do you explain something like this without sounding paranoid or vindictive? In the end, I kept it simple. A request. For a confidential meeting to discuss concerns about project attribution and professional conduct. Then I sent a separate email to myself, attaching the voice note with a detailed description of when and how I'd received it. Digital breadcrumbs. Evidence that couldn't be erased. By the time morning came, I had a plan. I arrived at the office early, before most of the team, and was surprised to find Jordan already at his desk, the glow of his monitor illuminating his focused expression. He looked up when I approached, his eyes registering concern. You okay, Em? You left pretty quickly after the meeting yesterday. I hesitated, weighing how much to share. Jordan had always been kind, but trust was a luxury I couldn't afford to misplace right now. I'm fine, I said, setting down my bag. Just disappointed about the presentation. Jordan's expression darkened. It wasn't right, what Mark did. Everyone knows you've been killing yourself over that project. I managed a small smile. It's not the first time. No, he agreed, leaning forward. It's not. And that's the problem. Listen, Emily, there's something you should know. His words were cut short by the ping of my email. Marissa, Lynn had responded, agreeing to meet me during lunch in the small conference room on the legal floor. My heart raced. Step 1 complete. What were you saying? I asked Jordan. He glanced toward the elevator bank where voices announced the arrival of more colleagues. Later, he promised. Not here. The morning crawled by. I buried myself in spreadsheets, avoiding eye contact with Mark when he strode past my desk without acknowledgement. At 11:45, I slipped away to the legal department on the 30th floor, a space I'd never had reason to visit before. Marissa Lynn's office was at the end of a long corridor, with glass walls that offered a breathtaking view of downtown Dallas. She was waiting for me, her expression neutral but not unkind. Emily, she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. You wanted to discuss something confidential? I took a deep breath and placed my phone on her desk. I received this by mistake yesterday, I said, and pressed play on the voice note. As Mark's slurred voice filled the room, I watched Marissa's expression change from professional interest to growing concern. By the time the recording ended with his panicked, "Shit, wrong chat," her lips were pressed into a thin line. "This is concerning," she said carefully, her legal training evident in her measured response. "And you believe he intends to present your work as his own to the board?" "The Southwest Distribution Network proposal is mine," I said firmly. "Every spreadsheet, every vendor conversation, every routing algorithm. I have the email trails, the meeting notes, the draft presentations, all of it. Mark has barely looked at it until now, when it's nearly complete and ready for board approval." Marissa nodded slowly. "Documentation will be crucial here. Can you forward me all evidence of your work on this project? Original files with metadata, intact, if possible." "Already compiled," I said, pulling a flash drive from my pocket. "Everything's here, organized. Chronologically." She raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You came prepared. My father always said, in a world of sharks, be a dolphin. Smarter, not meaner." A small smile touched her lips. "Wise man." She took the flash drive. "Emily, I want to be clear about something. This is a serious allegation against a senior executive. The company will investigate thoroughly, but these things take time. In the meantime, I'm still expected to work with him," I finished for her. "I understand. Can you do that? Maintain professionalism while this is being reviewed?" "Could I? Could I sit in meetings with the man who called me dead weight, fetch his coffee, watch him prepare to steal my work, and not betray a single emotion?" "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "I can." "Good," Marissa said, making a note, "because the board meeting for the Q4 strategic review is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Mark has already requested a slot to present the Southwest distribution proposal." My stomach clenched. 2 weeks. That's all the time I had. As I stood to leave, Marissa added, "One more thing, Emily. Who else knows about this?" I thought of Jordan, his unfinished warning from this morning. "No one," I said. "Not yet." Back at my desk, I found a message from Jordan. "Roof, 5 p.m. The rooftop garden was Lone Star's attempt at providing a wellness space for employees. A few potted plants and benches surrounded by a waist-high barrier, 30 floors above the Dallas streets. It was usually empty, especially as the workday wound down. Jordan was waiting when I arrived, gazing out at the skyline as the setting sun painted the glass buildings in shades of gold and amber. "I saw you meet with Marissa Lynn today," he said without preamble. I tensed. "How did you—" "I've been keeping tabs on Mark for months," he interrupted, turning to face me. "Ever since he did the same thing to Chris in marketing last year. And Zoe before that." "What are you talking about?" Jordan's expression was grim. "Mark has a pattern, Emily. He finds talented people, isolates them, minimizes their contributions, then takes credit for their work. Chris confronted him directly and was fired for insubordination 2 weeks later. Zoe transferred departments but was so demoralized she eventually quit." My mind raced. "How do you know all this?" "Because I'm gathering evidence," he said simply. "Dates, emails, project files. I've been documenting everything. And I think you just became his next target." I looked at Jordan, really looked at him for the first time. The quiet analyst who always sat in the back of meetings, who noticed everything but said little. I'd mistaken his reserve for disinterest, but now I saw the sharp intelligence in his eyes, the methodical mind behind his careful observations. "Jordan," I said slowly, "I have something you need to hear." I played him the voice note. His expression hardened with each word, his hands clenching into fists. "This is it," he said when it ended. "This is what we've been waiting for. Concrete proof of his intentions, in his own words. I've already shared it with legal," I told him. "But Mark's presenting to the board in 2 weeks. I don't know if the investigation will be completed by then." Jordan's smile was small but determined. "Then we need to make sure the truth comes out another way." He extended his hand. "Partners?" I hesitated for only a moment before clasping his hand in mine. "Partners." As the Dallas skyline glittered around us, a plan began to take shape. Not a plan of revenge, but of justice, of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Mark thought I was dead weight. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. The following day, my perspective on Lone Star dynamics had fundamentally changed. The sleek glass building that had once symbolized my professional aspirations now felt like an elaborate stage set, a place where appearances mattered more than substance, where people like Mark thrived while people like me fought for scraps of recognition. I arrived earlier than usual, my mind clear after a night of strategic planning with Jordan. We'd stayed on that rooftop until security had done their evening rounds, mapping out contingencies, identifying allies, anticipating Mark's next moves. "Morning, Emily," called Sophia from reception, her warm smile a small comfort in the increasingly hostile environment. I wondered how much she saw from her position at the front desk. Who arrived early, who left late, who escorted whom from the building with cardboard boxes in their arms. "Hi, Sophia," I replied, pausing instead of rushing past as I usually did. "Quick question. Who handles the final paperwork for vendor contracts these days? Is it still accounting, or has that moved to operations?" She tilted her head, thinking. "For new contracts, everything goes through accounting first, then to legal for final sign-off. Marissa's team handles all the official documentation." I nodded, filing away this crucial piece of information. "Thanks. Have a good day." As I settled at my desk, I opened my calendar to find a new meeting request from Mark. Project status update at 10 a.m. in his office. My pulse quickened, but I clicked accept without hesitation. The game had begun. Jordan arrived moments later, giving me a subtle nod as he passed. We'd agreed to maintain normal interactions at the office. No hushed conversations, no suspicious meetings. Mark had eyes everywhere. At precisely 10 a.m., I knocked on Mark's door, tablet in hand, prepared for anything. "Come in," he called, his voice artificially bright. When I entered, I found him leaning against his desk rather than sitting behind it, a power move designed to emphasize the difference in our positions. "Emily," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Thanks for making time," as if I had a choice. "Of course," I replied, keeping my expression neutral, despite the absurdity of his pretense. "What can I help you with?" "I wanted to touch base about the Southwest Distribution Network proposal," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp, assessing. "I know you've been working on elements of it, and I want to make sure we're aligned before the board presentation." Elements of it. Not spearheading it or developing it from the ground up, just elements. The revision of history had already begun. I nodded, betraying nothing. "I have all the materials organized. The vendor agreements are ready for final approval, and the phased implementation plan is complete." "Excellent," he said, straightening. "I'll need all files transferred to my drive by end of day. The board meeting has actually been moved up. It's next Friday now." My stomach dropped. Not 2 weeks, 10 days. Mark was accelerating his timeline, perhaps sensing something was amiss. "Next Friday," I repeated, my mind racing. "That's sooner than expected," he shrugged. "Foster wants to lock in the Q4 strategy before the investor call. I'll handle the presentation preparation. No need for you to worry about that part." "I bet you will," I thought, but outwardly I maintained my composed facade. Of course, though I was hoping to attend the meeting since I've been so involved with the project. Mark's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We'll see. Space is limited in the boardroom, and Foster keeps these meetings streamlined. I'll definitely make sure your contribution is noted." The lie was so transparent I almost admired its boldness. "Almost. That would be appreciated," I said, rising. "To leave. I'll have those files to you by 5. As I reached the door, he added, "Oh, and Emily, let's keep our project discussions between us for now. No need to create confusion among the wider team about who's responsible for what." I turned, meeting his gaze directly. "Clarity is important, isn't it?" Something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps. But it was gone in an instant. "Absolutely. That's why I like working with you, Emily. You understand how things work." If only you knew, I thought as I walked back to my desk, my mind already 3 steps ahead. By lunch, I had executed the first part of our plan. Instead of transferring all files to Mark's drive as instructed, I created a carefully curated selection, complete enough to appear comprehensive but missing key components that would make the proposal functional. The real files, with their original metadata proving my authorship, were safely backed up in multiple locations. "How'd it go with the snake?" Jordan whispered as we stood in line at the company cafe, his words masked by the hiss of the espresso machine. "He's moved up the timeline," I murmured back. "Board meeting is next Friday now." Jordan frowned. "That complicates things." "Or simplifies them," I countered. "Less time for him to figure out what we're doing." Back at my desk, I sent a carefully worded email to vendor relations, copying the contracts team. Subject: Southwest Distribution Network. Final contract preparation. As we approach final approval for the Southwest Distribution Network proposal, I'm confirming that all vendor agreements should be prepared for signature. Per company protocol, I'll need to be listed as the originating project lead on all documentation for audit purposes, with signature routing to include the standard approval chain. Please confirm receipt and expected completion timeline. Thank you, Emily Carter, Senior Analyst, Operations Division. It was a strategic move, establishing a paper trail that couldn't be easily erased, positioning myself officially as the project lead in a way that would be difficult for Mark to counter without raising red flags. The response came within the hour. Emily, confirming receipt. Contract packets will be prepared by EOD tomorrow with you listed as originating lead. Final approval signatures will include you, Department Head, M. Benton, Legal, M. Lynn, and CEO, J. Foster, per standard protocol. Rita Sanchez, Vendor Relations. I forwarded the email to my personal account, then deleted the forwarded copy from the company server. Another breadcrumb in my growing trail of evidence. The afternoon passed in a blur of careful preparations and normal-seeming work. I transferred the sanitized files to Mark as promised, included enough substantive content to prevent immediate suspicion, and maintained a perfectly pleasant demeanor when he passed my desk with a satisfied nod. At 6:30 p.m., when most of the floor had emptied, Jordan appeared at my cubicle. "Ready for phase 2? He asked quietly. I nodded, gathering my things. "Let's go." We took the elevator to the 29th floor, executive territory, as the rank-and-file employees called it. At this hour, most of the leadership team had left for the day, leaving only the occasional security guard making rounds. Jordan led me to a nondescript door marked Archives. "How do you have access to this?" I whispered as he swiped his badge. His smile was cryptic. "I helped upgrade the document management system last year. They never revoked my temporary clearance." Inside, rows of filing cabinets stretched the length of the room, supplemented by computer terminals for accessing digital records. "We need to find precedent," Jordan explained, moving to one of the terminals. "Evidence that Mark has done this before. The system keeps records of all project attributions, presentations, and personnel changes." For the next hour, we combed through records, building a damning timeline. Chris, from marketing, had indeed led the development of the customer retention strategy that won Mark his last promotion. His name appeared on all the draft documents, but was conspicuously absent from the final presentation. Zoe from Product had created the UX overhaul that Mark had presented as his brainchild at the leadership retreat. Her transfer request was submitted 3 days after the retreat ended. "There's a pattern," I said, staring at the screen. "He targets people who are competent but not connected, people without powerful allies. People he thinks won't fight back," Jordan added, his voice tight with anger. "But he made a mistake with you, Emily." I looked at him curiously. "Why me? What makes me different?" Jordan's gaze was steady. "Because you have evidence he doesn't know about. And because you're not alone this time." As we carefully replaced everything and prepared to leave, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Chris and Zoe, and whoever would have been next if Mark wasn't stopped. "We need one more thing," I said as the elevator descended to the lobby. "Access to the boardroom before the meeting." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said with newfound determination, "that the best way to expose a fraud is to let him hang himself with his own rope." Outside, the Dallas night was warm and humid, the city lights reflecting off low-hanging clouds. As we walked toward the parking garage, I received a notification, an email from Marissa Lynn. "Emily, our preliminary review indicates sufficient cause for concern. I've scheduled a meeting with Mr. Foster for Thursday morning to discuss findings thus far. Please maintain normal operations and confidentiality until then. Marissa Lynn, Head of Legal." I showed Jordan the email. "Thursday," he said thoughtfully, "the day before the board meeting." "Cutting it close," I replied. "We can't count on the investigation concluding in time." "Then we proceed as planned," Jordan said firmly. "Tomorrow we secure the contracts. Thursday we prepare the boardroom. Friday, I finished. We let the truth speak for itself." As I drove home through the Dallas traffic, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying began to lift. For months, I'd doubted myself, wondered if I truly belonged at Lone Star, if I was really as capable as I believed. Mark's voice note had been devastating, but also clarifying. The problem had never been my abilities. It had been his willingness to exploit and diminish them. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in days, ready for whatever came next. The vendor contracts arrived in my inbox at 4:42 p.m. the following day. 12 meticulously prepared agreements with the most prominent shipping companies in the Southwest region. Each document listed me as the originating project lead, with signature lines for myself, Mark, Marissa, and ultimately, CEO James Foster. I printed one copy of each contract and placed them in a manila folder, then sent a courtesy email to Mark. Contracts for the Southwest Distribution Network have been finalized and are ready for your review. Hard copies on, your desk, digital versions attached. Emily. His response came immediately. I'll handle the signatures. No need for you to process these. Of course he would say that. If I signed them first, as the originating lead should, it would create an official record of my role in the project. I waited 15 minutes, then walked casually past his office. Through the glass wall, I could see him leafing through the contracts, phone pressed to his ear, brow furrowed in concentration. Perfect. I continued to the break room, filled a mug with coffee I didn't need, and made my way back, timing my return to coincide with Mark's departure for what looked like a bathroom break. His office was empty, the contracts spread across his desk. With a quick glance around to ensure no one was watching, I slipped. Inside, pulled a pen from my pocket, and signed each contract in the designated space for the project lead. 12 signatures, each one a silent declaration. This is mine. I was back at my desk before Mark returned, my heart racing but my expression calm as I responded to routine emails. 20 minutes later, I received a meeting invitation from Rita in vendor relations. Contract processing. 10 a.m. tomorrow. The game continued. That evening, I met Jordan at a small Thai restaurant 10 blocks from the office, far enough away to avoid running into colleagues, close enough to be convenient. Did you sign them? He asked without preamble as I slid into the booth. I nodded, unfolding my napkin. All 12. Mark will either have to accept my signature as project lead or create a new set of contracts, which would raise questions about why the originals weren't sufficient. He'll probably try to handle the contract meeting himself, Jordan said, sipping his water. Keep you out of the loop. Already planned for that, I replied. I've set up alerts for any changes to the meeting details. We ordered pad thai and green curry, falling into easy conversation about our backgrounds, our paths to Lone Star, our aspirations beyond it. I learned that Jordan had grown up in Seattle, that he'd studied computer science at MIT, that he'd joined Lone Star because of its sustainability initiatives that had since been sidelined under executives like Mark. Why did you decide to help me? I asked as we shared mango sticky rice for dessert. You've put yourself at risk, too. Jordan considered this, his expression thoughtful. I watched it happen to Chris and Zoe and did nothing. Just kept my head down. Told myself it wasn't my business. He met my gaze. I don't want to be that person anymore. Later, as we walked to our cars, Jordan suddenly stopped. What if he removes your name from the contracts? I smiled. He can't. The contract system automatically logs all changes. Any alteration would create a record showing the original was modified, which would lead to questions about why. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Not everything, I admitted. But enough, I hope. The next morning, my alert chimed at 8:15 a.m. The contract processing meeting had been moved to 9 a.m., and my name had been removed from the invitation list. Mark was making his move. I sent a quick text to Jordan. Meeting changed. 9 a.m. I've been uninvited. His response. As expected. Proceed? Yes. At 8:55 a.m., I walked confidently into conference room B, where Rita from Vendor Relations was setting up her laptop. Her surprise at seeing me was evident. Emily, I thought the meeting invitation changed? Just a scheduling mix-up, I said smoothly, taking a seat. Since I'm the originating lead on these contracts, I need to be present for processing. Rita looked uncertain, but nodded. Of course, we're just waiting for Mr. Benton. Mark arrived at precisely 9 a.m., faltering almost imperceptibly when he saw me. Emily? He said, his tone carefully controlled. I didn't realize you'd be joining us. These are my contracts, Mark, I replied pleasantly. I've already signed them as project lead. I wanted to make sure everything proceeds correctly. A muscle twitched in his jaw, the only sign that my presence had disrupted his plans. Of course, he echoed Rita's words, taking a seat across from me. Let's get started. For the next hour, Rita methodically processed each contract, scanning the signed documents into the system, assigning tracking numbers, initiating the digital workflow that would route them to legal and eventually to the CEO. Mark signed each one as department head, his signature appearing below mine in the hierarchy, a visual confirmation of our respective roles in the project. The tension in the room was palpable, but to an outside observer, it would have appeared to be nothing more than a routine contract meeting. Only I could see the tightness around Mark's eyes, the slight tremor in his hand as he signed document after document, the growing realization that his plan was encountering unexpected obstacles. When we finished, Mark attempted one last maneuver. "Rita, I'll need to review the presentation materials with the CEO before these go to legal," he said, his tone casual, but his intention clear. He wanted to speak to Foster before Marissa could present her findings. "I'm sorry, Mr. Benton," Rita replied, "but the workflow is automated once contracts are in the system. They're already routed to legal for review. Company policy, I can't override it." Mark's smile never wavered, but I saw the flash of frustration in his eyes. "Of course, just thought we might expedite things." As we left the conference room, he placed a hand on my shoulder, guiding me to a quiet corner of the hallway. "Emily," he said, his voice low, "I appreciate your thoroughness, but in the future, please check with me before inserting yourself into meetings I'm handling." I met his gaze steadily. "I'm just following protocol, Mark. As the originating lead on this project, I need to be present for all formal proceedings. I'm sure you understand. Clarity about who's responsible for what is important, right?" I was throwing his own words back at him, and from the flicker of recognition in his eyes, he knew it. For a moment, I thought he might drop the facade, acknowledge that we both knew what was happening. Instead, he squeezed my shoulder a bit too firmly. "Just remember who you're dealing with," he said quietly, the threat barely veiled. "Your future at Lone Star depends on more than just following protocol." As he walked away, I felt a chill despite the office's carefully regulated temperature. Mark had made his career by intimidating people like me into silence, but he'd never encountered someone who had evidence of his tactics, or someone who was willing to fight back. That afternoon, I received a brief email from, Marissa Lynn. "Meeting with Foster completed. He's reviewing documentation. Remain available tomorrow. You may be called to provide additional context. Tomorrow, the day of the board meeting." Whatever Marissa had discussed with Foster, whatever conclusions they'd reached, would unfold alongside my own carefully laid plans. That night, I barely slept, rehearsing scenarios in my mind, anticipating Mark's potential counter-moves. By dawn, I was exhausted but resolute. I chose my outfit carefully, a charcoal gray suit that projected confidence without flashiness, comfortable shoes in case the day required quick movement between meetings, minimal jewelry that wouldn't distract from my words. As I drove to the office, the rising sun painted the Dallas skyline in shades of gold and promise. Whatever happened today, I would no longer be invisible. Mark had tried to erase me, to reduce me to dead weight, but in doing so, he had only made me stronger, more determined. The final act was about to begin, and for once, I was ready for the spotlight. The Lone Star Dynamics executive boardroom occupied the entire northeast corner of the 30th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Dallas skyline. I'd walked past those heavy mahogany doors dozens of times but had never been invited inside. Today, that would change. I arrived at the office 2 hours early, the building still quiet except for the maintenance staff and a few ambitious early risers. Jordan was already waiting in the lobby, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, passing me a cup. I took a grateful sip. "Not really. Too busy playing out worst-case scenarios." "And best case?" His eyes were kind but serious. "I try not to hope for too much," I admitted. "I just want the truth to be known." We rode the elevator in companionable silence, each lost in our thoughts. When we reached our floor, Jordan squeezed my arm gently. "No matter what happens today," he said, "you've already won by standing up for yourself." His words stayed with me as I settled at my desk, reviewing the presentation materials I'd prepared, just in case. At 8:30 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Carter, please come to my office at 9. James Foster, CEO." My heart leaped into my throat. The CEO wanted to see me, an hour before the board meeting. This wasn't part of the plan. I glanced toward Jordan's desk, but he was engrossed in a call, oblivious to my sudden panic. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my tablet and a small portfolio containing hard copies of my evidence, the voice note transcript, the project timelines, the documentation of my work. The CEO's office suite occupied the corner opposite the boardroom, a testament to his preference for morning light. His assistant, a poised woman in her 50s, looked up as I approached. "Emily Carter?" she confirmed. "Mr. Foster is expecting you. Go right in." James Foster was not what most people expected from the CEO of a multinational corporation. In his mid-60s, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on the end of his nose, he looked more like a university professor than a corporate titan. Yet the shrewd intelligence in his eyes and the quiet authority in his bearing left no doubt about why he'd led Lone Star to its current success. "Ms. Carter," he said, rising from behind his desk. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." I perched on the edge of a leather chair, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I've had some interesting, conversations in the past 24 hours, Foster continued, removing his glasses and placing them carefully on his desk. "Marissa Lynn shared some concerning information with me yesterday. Then, early this morning, Mark Benton requested an urgent meeting to discuss, as he put it, team dynamics and project attributions." My stomach tightened. Mark was making preemptive moves. "I've been at this long enough to know when something unusual is happening in my company," Foster said, his gaze direct. "So I'd like to hear from you, in your own words, exactly what's going on with the Southwest Distribution Network proposal." This was my moment, the opportunity I'd been working toward. I took a deep breath and began. 6 months ago, I identified an opportunity to completely restructure our distribution network across 5 states. The current system is fragmented, inefficient, and costly. My proposal creates a hub-and-spoke model that would save approximately $3.7 million annually while improving delivery times by 22%. Foster nodded. "I'm familiar with the broad strokes. Go on." "I've led this project from conception to implementation planning. I've personally negotiated with all 12 vendors, developed the routing algorithms, and created the phased rollout strategy." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. Mark Benton was minimally involved until the project neared completion. 3 days ago, I received a voice note from him, accidentally sent to me instead of his colleagues, in which he explicitly stated his intention to present my work as his own at today's board meeting. Foster's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened. "That's a serious allegation?" "Yes, sir," I agreed, opening my portfolio. "Which is why I have documentation. The voice note is preserved, along with a complete timeline of the project development showing my authorship of all materials. Additionally, all 12 vendor contracts list me as the originating project lead, a fact that can be verified through our contract management system." I slid the portfolio across the desk. Foster didn't immediately open it. "Ms. Carter, do you know why I called you here today?" The question caught me off guard. "I assumed because of Marissa's investigation." "Partly," he acknowledged, "but also because 30 minutes ago I received an unusual email from Rita Sanchez in vendor relations. She expressed concern about, and I quote, potential irregularities in the contract processing for the Southwest Distribution Network. It seems Mr. Benton requested that all contracts be reprocessed this morning, with a different project lead listed." My breath caught. Mark was trying to erase my name from the official record. When Rita explained that such a change would trigger a system flag requiring investigation, Foster continued, Mr. Benton reportedly became, in her words, agitated. The CEO finally opened my portfolio, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. When he reached the transcript of the voice note, his eyebrows rose slightly. "Dead weight," he read aloud, his tone contemplative. An interesting choice of words for someone whose work he intended to present. I remained silent, letting the evidence speak for itself. Foster closed the portfolio and leaned back in his chair. "The board meeting begins in 45 minutes. Mr. Benton is scheduled to present the Southwest Distribution Network proposal as the 3rd agenda item." He studied me for a moment. "What would you like to see happen today, Ms. Carter?" The question was unexpected. CEOs didn't typically ask junior analysts what outcome they desired from board meetings. "I want the truth to be known," I said simply. "I want credit for my work, and I want to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else at Lone Star." Foster nodded, as if I'd confirmed something for him. "I've been CEO of this company for 11 years, Ms. Carter. Do you know what I've learned is the most valuable asset in business? Innovation?" I ventured. "Efficiency? Trust," he said firmly. "Without trust, none of the rest matters. When someone betrays trust, especially a leader, the damage extends far beyond a single project or person." He stood, signaling the end of our meeting. "Thank you for your candor. Please plan to attend the board meeting. Your presence will be required." As I walked back to my desk, my mind raced with possibilities. Foster hadn't revealed his intentions, but he'd listened. He'd seen the evidence. For the first time, I allowed myself a glimmer of hope. Jordan was waiting anxiously. Where were you? What happened? Foster wanted to see me, I explained, keeping my voice low. Mark tried to have the contracts reprocessed this morning. Change my name on them. Jordan's eyes widened. Could he do that? No. The system flagged it. Rita reported it to Foster. I glanced at the clock. The meeting starts in half an hour and Foster wants me there. That's good, right? I nodded, though uncertainty still gnawed at me. I think so. But Mark will be prepared too. He knows something's wrong. At 9:55 a.m., my email pinged with an official calendar invitation. Q4 Strategic. Review. Board meeting. I showed Jordan, who gave me a discreet thumbs up as I gathered my materials. The walk to the boardroom felt like the longest journey of my career. Each step carried me closer to confrontation, to potential vindication, to the unknown. As I approached those imposing mahogany doors, I saw Mark standing outside, reviewing notes on his tablet. He looked up as I neared, confusion quickly morphing into suspicion. Emily? His tone was sharp. What are you doing here? I've been invited to the meeting, I replied calmly. His eyes narrowed. By whom? By me, came Foster's voice as the CEO approached from the opposite direction. Good morning, Mark. I believe we're ready to begin. Mark's expression cycled rapidly through surprise, calculation, and finally a forced smile. Of course, Jim. I was just reviewing the distribution proposal one last time. It's going to transform our operations in the Southwest. Foster's gaze was steady. I'm looking forward to learning more about it. He gestured to the doors. Shall we? Inside, the boardroom was even more impressive than I'd imagined. A massive table of polished wood dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs occupied by the most senior executives of Lone Star Dynamics. Marissa Lynn was already seated, her expression professional, but her eyes finding mine with a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Everyone, Foster announced as we entered. For those who haven't met her, this is Emily Carter from our operations team. She'll be joining us for the relevant portions of today's discussion. Marka, immediately took a seat near the head of the table, a power position. I chose a spot across from Marissa, avoiding eye contact with Mark, who was now watching me with barely concealed apprehension. The meeting began with routine updates, quarterly financials, market analysis, competitor movements. I listened attentively but felt the tension building as we approached agenda item 3. Mark shifted, in his seat, reorganizing his tablet and notes, clearing his throat. Finally, Foster turned the page in his agenda. Next item, the Southwest Distribution Network proposal. This has been identified as a major initiative for Q4 implementation. Mark, you're listed as the presenter, but I understand Emily Carter has been deeply involved as well. Mark straightened, his confident smile firmly in place. Yes, Emily has contributed to certain aspects of the project. I've been overseeing the overall development and strategy. He stood, moving toward the presentation screen. If I may, I'd like to walk everyone through the proposal now. Foster nodded, but his eyes flicked briefly to me. Before you begin, I'd like to clarify something. The vendor contracts for this initiative list Emily Carter as the originating project lead. Can you explain that designation? The question hung in the air, a perfect trap. If Mark acknowledged my role, he undermined his own claim to the project. If he denied it, he contradicted official documentation. Mark's smile faltered for just a second. That's a technical designation. For processing purposes. In practice, I've directed all strategics elements of the proposal. I see, Foster said mildly. And the implementation timeline and cost projections, who developed those? That was my work, Mark replied smoothly. With input from Emily and others on the team, of course. The lie was so bold, so confident, that for a moment I wondered if anyone would question it. Then Foster reached for a folder in front of him. That's curious, he said. Because according to the metadata on these files, Emily Carter created and modified all of these documents, with minimal access logs from your account. He looked up. Would you care to clarify? The boardroom went silent. Mark's expression froze, his mind visibly racing for a plausible explanation. I worked closely with Emily, he stammered, guided her development of those materials. Foster nodded as if considering this. One last question before you begin your presentation. This morning, did you attempt to have the vendor contracts reprocessed with your name replacing Emily's as project lead? And there it was, the question that couldn't be answered with a partial truth or clever evasion. Mark's face paled slightly as he realized the extent of what Foster knew. There was A clerical error I was attempting to correct, he managed, his voice less certain now. Foster turned to me. Ms. Carter, as the listed project lead, perhaps you should present the Southwest Distribution Network proposal to the board. All eyes turned to me, some curious, some skeptical, some openly surprised. This was the moment I had prepared for, but never truly expected to happen. I would be honored, Mr. Foster, I said, rising from my seat, tablet in hand. As I walked to the front of the room, Mark remained standing, frozen in place, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling around him. Please take your seat, Mark, Foster said quietly but firmly. I believe we're all eager to hear about this innovative proposal, from its actual creator. Standing before the board of directors at, Lone Star Dynamics, 12 of the most influential business leaders in Texas, I should have been terrified. My entire career hung in the balance. Mark Benton, now seated but visibly seething, watched my every move with barely concealed hatred. The executive team, many of whom had never heard my name before today, awaited my presentation with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Yet as I connected my tablet to the display system, a strange calm settled over me. For 6 months, I had lived and breathed this project. I knew every data point, every projection, every potential objection. This was my work, my vision, and for the first time, I had the opportunity to present it without filter or interference. Good morning, I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. The Southwest Distribution Network proposal represents a fundamental reimagining of our logistics infrastructure across 5 states. Our current system evolved piecemeal over 20 years, resulting in inefficiencies that cost us approximately $5.2 million annually in unnecessary shipping expenses and lost time. I brought up the first slide, a map showing our existing distribution routes, a chaotic web of overlapping lines. As you can see, we currently maintain 17 distribution points with minimal coordination between them. This results in duplicate shipments, underutilized trucks, and excessive fuel consumption. The next slide revealed my proposed solution, a streamlined network centered around 3 strategic hubs with carefully plotted spoke routes. By consolidating to a hub-and-spoke model, we can reduce shipping costs by 28%, decrease delivery times by 22%, and significantly lower our carbon footprint. The initial investment of $1.2 million in infrastructure adjustments will be recovered within 4.3 months. For the next 20 minutes, I walked the board through every aspect of the proposal, the vendor negotiations I'd conducted, the algorithm I'd developed to optimize, routing, the phased implementation plan that would minimize disruption to existing operations. With each slide, each explanation, I felt more confident, more assured. This was what I was meant to do. Throughout the presentation, I was acutely aware of Mark's presence. His initial shock had hardened into a cold, calculating glare. He was already planning his next move, his counterattack. But for now, he was powerless, a spectator to his own undoing. When I reached the financial projections, CFO Patricia Winters leaned forward, clearly engaged. These savings estimates are impressive, Ms. Carter. What methodology did you use to arrive at them? A combination of historical data analysis and forward modeling, I explained, bringing up a supplementary slide I'd prepared for exactly this. Question. I examined 3 years of shipping records across all regions, identified pattern inefficiencies, and applied the new routing algorithm to project future costs. I've also built in a 15% contingency buffer to account for fuel price volatility and potential implementation delays. Patricia nodded, satisfied. Thorough work. When I finished the formal presentation, hands went up around the table. For the next 30 minutes, I fielded questions, some challenging, some clarifying, all substantive. These weren't polite inquiries. These were hard-hitting questions from executives who needed to be convinced before committing millions to a new strategy. And to each one, I had a thoughtful, data-backed response. Finally, Foster leaned back in his chair. I believe we have a comprehensive understanding of the proposal now. Thank you, Ms. Carter. He glanced around the table. Unless there are further questions, I suggest we move to discussion and vote. This was standard procedure. The presenter would leave while the board deliberated privately. I gathered my tablet and notes, preparing to exit. Actually, Mark suddenly interjected, his voice tight with controlled anger. I have several concerns about the implementation timeline that haven't been addressed. The room tensed. Everyone present now understood the unusual dynamic unfolding before them, even if they didn't know all the details. Foster regarded Mark coolly. I believe Ms. Carter covered the implementation timeline in considerable detail, including contingency planning for potential delays. With respect, Mark pressed, there are operational considerations that weren't included in her presentation. As department head, I have broader visibility into competing priorities that could impact our resources. It was a transparent attempt to reassert control, to undermine my presentation by suggesting I lacked the necessary perspective. But Foster wasn't having it. Those are fair points to raise. During discussion, he said evenly, Ms. Carter, thank you for your comprehensive presentation. You're welcome to remain for the discussion phase, given your central role in this proposal. Mark's expression darkened further. This was unprecedented. Normally, presenters were dismissed during board deliberations. Thank you, Mr. Foster, I said, returning to my seat rather than leaving. Foster turned to Mark. Now, you mentioned operational concerns. Please elaborate. Put on the spot, Mark fumbled through a series of vague objections. Resource constraints, competing initiatives, market uncertainties, each one weaker than the last. With each point, I provided specific, fact-based responses, never confrontational, but systematically dismantling his arguments. It was Patricia Winters who finally cut through the tension. I've heard enough, she said briskly. This proposal is solid. The ROI is compelling. The implementation plan is thorough. I move that we approve the Southwest Distribution Network as presented by Ms. Carter, with implementation to begin immediately. Seconded, said Thomas Chen, head of global operations. Foster nodded. All in favor? Hands rose around the table. 9, 10, 11 of the 12 board members. Only Mark kept his hand down, his face a mask of barely contained fury. The motion carries, Foster declared. The Southwest Distribution Network proposal is approved for immediate implementation. Ms. Carter will serve as project lead, reporting directly to me on this initiative until completion. The implication was clear. Mark was being bypassed entirely. The victory was more complete than I could have imagined. As the meeting shifted to the next agenda item, Foster addressed me quietly. Ms. Carter, I believe we've covered what you needed to be present for. Thank you for your contribution today. I nodded, gathering my materials. As I stood to leave, I caught Marissa Lynn's eye across the table. Her slight smile conveyed volumes. Professional approval, personal satisfaction, a recognition of justice served. Mark didn't look at me as I left the boardroom. He sat rigidly in his chair, staring straight ahead, the picture of a man whose world was crumbling around him. Outside in the hallway, I allowed myself a moment of pure, unadulterated relief. I had done it. Against all odds, against a system designed to favor people like Mark, I had reclaimed my work and my dignity. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. How did it go? I replied simply. We won. I returned to my desk in a daze, the events of the past 2 hours still sinking in. Colleagues glanced my way curiously. Word was already spreading that something significant had happened in the boardroom. At 1:15 p.m., the board meeting concluded. Executives filed out, several nodding in my direction as they passed. Mark was not among them. At 2:30 p.m., a company-wide email arrived from James Foster. Subject, Southwest Distribution Network Initiative. I'm pleased to announce the board's approval of the Southwest Distribution Network proposal, a transformative initiative that will significantly enhance our logistics capabilities across 5 states while delivering substantial cost savings. This innovative project was developed by Emily Carter, who will lead implementation as Special Project Director, reporting directly to me. Please join me in congratulating Emily on this achievement and supporting her team as they move forward with this critical work. James Foster, CEO. My phone and email immediately exploded with congratulatory messages, some from colleagues I barely knew, others from team members who had watched my struggle from the sidelines. Jordan appeared at my desk, his smile wide and genuine. Special Project Director, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. That's 2 levels above your current position. I can't believe it either, I admitted, still processing the rapid turn of events. Believe it, he said firmly. You earned this, Emily. Every bit of it. At 4:45 p.m., as the workday wound down, Marissa Lynn stopped by my desk. Quite a day, she observed with characteristic understatement. I laughed softly. That's one way to put it. Her expression turned more serious. You should know that Mark has been placed on administrative leave pending a full review of his management practices. The voice note you provided, was illuminating, but it also opened the door to other concerns that had been dismissed previously. Chris from marketing, Zoe from product. How many others had there been? What happens now? I asked. That depends partly on you, Marissa replied. As the directly affected party, your input will be considered in determining appropriate consequences. I thought about it, about revenge, about justice, about what would truly serve the company and its people best. I don't want him destroyed, I said finally. I just want the pattern stopped. No one else should go through what I did, what others before me did. Marissa nodded, a glimmer of respect in her eyes. I'll make sure that's noted. As she turned to leave, she added, by the way, your new office will be ready on Monday. Director Rao. Level comes with a window. I sat at my cubicle long after most of my colleagues had left for the day, watching the setting sun paint the Dallas skyline in hues of orange and gold. So much had changed in just 3 days. From the moment I'd heard Mark's voice calling me deadweight, to now, with a promotion and a project that was officially, publicly, mine. The victory wasn't in Mark's downfall. It was in the truth finally coming to light. It was in the recognition of my work, my capabilities, my worth. It was in knowing that the next person who might have been erased, rendered invisible by someone with more power but less integrity, might now be seen and heard. As I finally gathered my things to leave, I noticed a small post-it note stuck to my monitor. Jordan's handwriting. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. You don't need to scream to prove your worth. The truth speaks loud enough when the time is right. I smiled, tucking the note into my pocket as I headed for the elevator. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, a new chapter. But tonight I would savor this moment, not of revenge, but of restoration. My dignity reclaimed, my future suddenly wide open. The truth had spoken. And finally, everyone had listened. 1 month after the board meeting that changed everything, I stood in my new office on the 29th floor, gazing out at the Dallas skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The space was still sparsely decorated. Just a few personal items transferred from my old cubicle and a potted peace lily that Jordan had given me as a corner office-wide warming gift. But it was mine, earned through work and perseverance, rather than manipulation and deceit. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. All hands meeting, 10 a.m. main auditorium. Foster had called the company-wide gathering yesterday, providing no details beyond important organizational announcements. The rumor mill had been churning ever since. As I rode the elevator down to the ground floor, I found myself standing next to Patricia Winters, the CFO who had been the first to support my proposal in the boardroom. Morning, Emily, she said with a nod. Ready for today's announcements? I'm not sure what to expect, I admitted. Any hints? She smiled enigmatically. Let's just say Foster's been busy. The board had several late nights this week. The Lone Star Auditorium was already packed when we arrived. I spotted Jordan saving me a seat near the front and made my way toward him, aware of the glances and whispers that followed me. In the week since my promotion, I'd become something of a minor celebrity within the company, the analyst who had stood up to a predatory executive and won. Any idea what this is about? Jordan asked as I sat down. I shook my head. Patricia hinted that the board's been working overtime, but nothing specific. Before he could respond, the lights dimmed, and James Foster walked onto the stage. The CEO looked both serious and energized, his usual professorial demeanor charged with purpose. Good morning, Lone Star, he began, his voice filling the space. Thank you all for being here. Today marks an important transition for our company, one that I believe will strengthen our culture, our operations, and ultimately, our future. He paused, scanning the audience. For 11 years, I've had the privilege of leading this organization. In that time, we've grown from a regional player to an industry leader. But growth brings challenges, and recently, it's become clear that we need to examine not just what we achieve, but how we achieve it. A slide appeared behind him. Lone Star Dynamics, Culture Reset Initiative. Recent events have brought to light concerning patterns within our organization. Foster continued, his tone measured but firm. Patterns of behavior that undermine our core values of integrity, collaboration, and respect. Behaviors that, if left unchecked, threaten the very foundation of what makes Lone Star successful. Though he didn't mention Mark by name, the implication was clear. I felt a strange mix of vindication and discomfort, proud that my stand had catalyzed change, yet uneasy being indirectly at the center of such a public moment. Effective immediately, we are implementing several structural and cultural changes, Foster announced. First, a new ethics committee with ISO, representatives from all levels of the organization, not just executive leadership. This committee will have real authority to investigate concerns and recommend action. He clicked to the next slide, which listed several bullet points. Second, a revised performance evaluation system that includes peer and subordinate feedback. Your advancement at Lone Star will no longer depend solely on impressing those above you, but on how you treat and develop those around and below you. Murmurs rippled through the audience. This was significant, a fundamental shift in how power and recognition would be distributed. Third, a project attribution protocol that ensures all contributors receive appropriate credit for their work. No more invisible labor, no more stolen ideas. My throat tightened. With emotion. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt erased. Everyone whose contributions had been minimized or appropriated. And finally, Foster said, his voice taking on a more personal tone, I am announcing a change in leadership structure. After careful consideration and board approval, we are eliminating the position of Chief Operations Officer and creating 3 new executive roles that will report directly to me. SVP of Global Supply Chain, SVP of Regional Operations, and SVP of Innovation and Implementation. Another slide appeared, showing an organizational chart with the new positions. I'm pleased to announce that Thomas Chen will be taking on the Global Supply Chain role, effective immediately. Applause filled the auditorium as Thomas, who had seconded my proposal at the board meeting, stood briefly to acknowledge the recognition. For regional operations, we're bringing in Zoe Ramirez, who previously led our product division before taking a position with our competitors. I'm thrilled that she's agreed to return to Lone Star in this expanded capacity. Zoe, the name hit me like a thunderbolt. Zoe from Product, one of Mark's previous victims, who had left the company after he stole her work. Foster hadn't just recognized the problem, he was actively working to right past wrongs. And for the Innovation and Implementation Division, which will focus on turning promising ideas into operational reality, I'm proud to announce our own Emily Carter as Senior Vice President. The world seemed to stop. Around me, applause erupted, but I barely heard it through the rushing in my ears. Jordan nudged me, grinning widely as colleagues turned in their seats to look at me, their expressions ranging from surprise to delight. Senior Vice President, an executive position, just weeks after I'd been a virtually invisible analyst. Emily has demonstrated exceptional strategic thinking, meticulous execution, and, perhaps most importantly, the courage to stand for truth even when it was difficult, Foster continued, looking directly at me now. These are precisely the qualities we need in our leadership team as we move Lone Star into its next chapter. In a daze, I rose and walked to the stage as Foster gestured for me to join him. The applause continued, swelling as I reached the podium. Thank you, I managed, the microphone amplifying my voice across the auditorium. I'm honored and somewhat overwhelmed, but I'm also incredibly excited about where Lone Star is heading. The changes announced today aren't just about new titles or organizational charts. They're about creating a culture where merit is recognized, where integrity matters, and where collaboration triumphs over competition. I paused, finding Jordan's encouraging face in the crowd. I've experienced firsthand what happens when those values are compromised. But I've also seen what's possible when people of principle stand together. That's the Lone Star I want to help build. One where everyone's contributions are valued, where innovation thrives because people feel safe to share ideas, and where we succeed not at each other's expense, but through each other's support. More applause followed as I returned to my seat, my head spinning with the magnitude of what had just happened. Foster continued with other announcements, new initiatives, strategic priorities, organizational changes, but I barely registered the details, still processing my own unexpected elevation. After the meeting, colleagues surrounded me with congratulations and questions. Through the crowd, I glimpsed a familiar face, Rita from Vendor Relations, who had flagged Mark's attempt to remove my name from the contracts. She gave me a subtle thumbs up, her expression saying what words couldn't, "You deserve this." Later that afternoon, I found myself back in Foster's office, this time not as a nervous analyst, but as a newly minted executive. I'm still in shock, I admitted as I took a seat across from him. Foster smiled. You shouldn't be. Your handling of the Southwest Distribution Network, both the project itself and the complications surrounding it, demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we need. But SVP, that's several levels above my previous position. Titles are just labels, Emily, he said, leaning forward. What? Matters is capability and character. You've proven you have both. His expression grew more serious. There's something else you should know. The board's investigation into Mark Benton's conduct uncovered a pattern that extended beyond what you experienced. 7 cases over 5 years, all following the same playbook. Identifying talented individuals, isolating them, taking credit for their work. I thought of Zoe, returning to the company she'd felt forced to leave. Of Chris from marketing, whose recognition had been stolen. Of others whose names I might never know. What happened to him? I asked quietly. He was terminated last week. The severance agreement includes a non-disclosure clause, which is why there was no public announcement. But it also includes a provision barring him from providing references or discussing former Lone Star employees. He won't be able to damage anyone else's reputation or career. It wasn't revenge. It was consequences. It was protection for others who might have fallen victim to his tactics. It was justice, administered calmly and appropriately. Thank you, I said simply. Foster shook his head. Don't thank me. This outcome isn't a gift. It's a result of your work, your courage, and your integrity. He handed me a folder. Here's an overview of your new role and the team you'll be leading. Take the weekend to review it. We'll meet Monday morning to discuss next steps. As I left the executive floor, now technically my new home within the company, I ran into Jordan waiting by the elevators. SVP Carter, he said with a mock salute. Does this mean you're too important to have lunch with mere mortals now? I laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. I think I need that lunch more than ever. My head is still spinning. Over sandwiches at our usual spot, now perhaps a bit beneath my new station but comfortingly familiar, Jordan's expression grew thoughtful. You know, when we started this, I just wanted to see Mark get what he deserved, he said. I never imagined it would lead to company-wide reforms, or to you joining the executive team. Me neither, I admitted. I was just trying to reclaim my project, to not be erased. And now you're helping reshape the entire culture. He raised his coffee cup in a toast. To being seen. I clinked my cup against his. To the truth speaking for itself. As we finished. Lunch, Jordan hesitated. There's something I've been meaning to ask you. Now that you're my boss's boss's boss, it's probably inappropriate, but would you like to have dinner sometime? Not lunch, not as colleagues, but a date? The question surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Through the crisis with Mark, the board presentation, and now this promotion, Jordan had been a steadfast ally, a perceptive friend, someone who saw me when I was invisible to others. I'd like that, I said, a different kind of warmth spreading through me than the professional satisfaction of the morning's announcement. I'd like that very much. As we walked back to the office, the Dallas summer sun high overhead, I felt a profound sense of alignment, as if the universe had finally balanced. Accounts that had long been skewed, not through dramatic confrontation or public humiliation, but through the quiet power of truth finally being heard. Mark had called me dead weight. Now his words hung in the empty air while I soared. 6 months later, I stood in the same boardroom where my journey had begun, but everything had changed. Now, I wasn't fighting for recognition. I was leading the presentation on the full implementation of the Southwest Distribution Network, which had exceeded even my optimistic projections. Shipping costs had dropped by 32%, delivery times had improved by 25%, and the initial investment had been recovered in just under 4 months. The numbers speak for themselves, I concluded, addressing the board with a confidence that now felt natural rather than forced. But the true success story is the team that made it happen. From logistics to IT, from vendor relations to field operations, this was a collaborative effort that showcased Lone Star at its best. Foster nodded approvingly. Impressive results, Emily. And I understand there's a Phase 2 being developed? Yes, I confirmed. Jordan Wells from my team is leading the expansion initiative for the Northwest region. He's identified similar opportunities for consolidation and optimization there, with potential savings of up to $4.1 million annually. Jordan, now a senior director in my division, smiled from his seat at the table. Our relationship had progressed alongside our careers, professional boundaries carefully maintained at work, a deepening personal connection outside it. We made a point of keeping these worlds separate, but his presence in this room, presenting his own innovative project, felt like the closing of a perfect circle. After the meeting, Foster pulled me aside. The transition team for the Denver acquisition is finalizing their report. I'd like you to review it before our strategy session next week. Your perspective on integrating their distribution network with ours would be valuable. Of course, I replied. I'll have feedback for you by Thursday. This was my new normal, being included in high-level decisions, having my expertise not just acknowledged, but actively sought. The novelty had worn off, replaced by a steady confidence in my abilities and my place in the organization. Later that afternoon, I met with my leadership team, 6 directors, each responsible for a different aspect of innovation and implementation. Among them was Tiffany from marketing, formerly one of Mark's cronies, who had approached me shortly after my promotion with surprising candor. I owe you an apology, she had said then, visibly uncomfortable but determined. I laughed at that voice note. I was part of it, and I'm ashamed of that now. I could have rejected her. Overture maintained the division between us. Instead, I had seen an opportunity for genuine change. What matters is what happens next, I had told her. Mark created an environment where people felt they had to align with him to succeed. That's not how my team will operate. Now, 6 months later, Tiffany was one of my most valuable directors, her marketing expertise essential to successfully launching our innovations. The past wasn't forgotten, but it had been transformed into a foundation for something better. After the meeting, I returned to my office to find a notification from Human Resources. The final candidates for our newly created ethics advocate position would be interviewing next week. The role had been my suggestion, a designated person to whom employees could bring concerns about attribution, credit, or other ethical issues without fear of retaliation. Someone who would ensure that what happened to me, to Chris, to Zoe, wouldn't happen to others. As I reviewed the candidates' qualifications, my phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. Dinner at Antonio's to celebrate the board approval? 7:30? I smiled, typing back, "Perfect, I'll meet you there." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and decisions. At 6:45, I gathered my things, preparing to leave for dinner. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed a young analyst working late, her desk lamp illuminating a spreadsheet filled with complex calculations. Something in her focused expression, her quiet determination, reminded me of myself a year ago. "Working on something interesting?" I asked, stopping by her desk. She looked up, surprised to be addressed by an executive. "Oh, yes, Ms. Carter. I'm analyzing potential routing improvements for the Southwest network. I know the current system is new, but I've identified some potential efficiencies that weren't in the original model." Her nervousness was familiar, the fear of overstepping, of suggesting improvements to someone else's established work. The old Lone Star culture would have punished such initiative. "I'd love to see that analysis when you're ready," I told her. "Innovation isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. If you found ways to make the system better, that's exactly what we need." Her face brightened. "Really? I was worried it might seem presumptuous." "Not at all," I assured her. "That's how, progress happens. Someone sees a possibility others have missed. Send it to me when you're ready, and we'll set up time to discuss it." As I continued to the elevator, I felt her watching me, perhaps with the same mix of hope and uncertainty I had once felt watching others in positions of influence. The difference was that she wouldn't have to navigate the toxic environment I had faced. She wouldn't be called dead weight for contributing. She wouldn't have her work stolen by someone who saw her talent as a resource to be exploited rather than nurtured. Antonio's was busy when I arrived, the upscale Italian restaurant a favorite among Dallas professionals. Jordan had already secured a table, rising to greet me with a warm smile that still gave me butterflies, even after months of dating. "The conquering hero arrives," he teased as I sat down. "How does it feel to have the board practically falling over themselves to praise your work?" "Surreal," I admitted, accepting the glass of wine he'd already ordered for me. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find myself back in that cubicle, being sent for coffee while Mark takes credit for my ideas." Jordan's expression softened. "But you didn't just escape that fate. You changed the system that made it possible." It was true. The Culture Reset initiative that Foster had announced 6 months ago had transformed Lone Star. The new performance evaluation system had exposed and corrected power imbalances throughout the organization. The project attribution protocol ensured that everyone's contributions were documented and recognized. The ethics committee on which Jordan now served had handled dozens of cases, resolving them with fairness and transparency. "We changed it together," I corrected him. "You were taking notes on Mark's behavior long before I received that voice note. You were gathering evidence when everyone else was looking away." He shook his head. "I was documenting the problem. You were brave enough to confront it, and smart enough to do it the right way." After dinner, we walked through downtown Dallas, the evening air crisp with early autumn. The city lights reflected off glass skyscrapers, including the Lone Star building where both our lives had changed so dramatically. I heard Zoe's team is crushing their targets this quarter, Jordan mentioned as we strolled, and Chris is heading up the new digital marketing division. Foster made a point of reviewing all the people who left or were sidelined during Mark's tenure, I explained. He's been systematically correcting those injustices. It's not just about moving forward, it's about making right what went wrong. We stopped at a small park, finding a bench with a view of the skyline. Jordan took my hand, his expression turning serious. You know, when all this started, I was angry. At Mark, at the system that enabled him, at myself for not speaking up sooner. I wanted justice, maybe even revenge. He paused, looking out at the city lights. But what happened wasn't about punishment. It was about restoration, about creating something better from something broken. I squeezed his hand, thinking about how far we'd both come. My dad always said that true victory isn't about destroying your opponent. It's about building something they couldn't tear down. Wise man, Jordan said, echoing Marissa Lynn's words from months ago. I'd like to meet him someday. You will, I promised. They're coming for Thanksgiving. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the city humming around us. Then Jordan turned to face me, directly. Emily, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. The seriousness in his tone made my pulse quicken. What is it? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I had a whole speech prepared about how we've faced challenges together, about how you inspire me every day with your integrity and brilliance. But the truth is simpler than that. He opened the box, revealing a delicate ring with a single diamond. I love you. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me? Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness or even overwhelming joy, but from a profound sense of rightness. This moment, this man, this future opening before me, it all felt like the universe completing a perfect circuit. Yes, I said simply, my voice steady and sure. Yes, I will. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. How a moment meant to diminish me had instead revealed my strength. How an attempt to erase me had instead written me into a bigger story than I could have imagined. Mark's voice note, that cruel dismissal that had called me dead weight, had been the catalyst for transformation, not just in my career but in the entire organization. His attempt to steal my work had led to systemic changes that would protect countless others. His cruelty had ultimately created space for kindness, for justice, for love to flourish. Later that night, as Jordan slept beside me in the apartment we now shared, I found myself thinking about that voice note again. Once the memory of those words had stung like an open wound. Now they seemed like distant echoes from another lifetime, significant not for their content, but for the change they had precipitated. I no longer needed to prove my worth to anyone, not to Mark, not to Lone Star, not even to myself. The truth had indeed spoken, loud and clear, and in its wake had come not just professional recognition, but deeper gifts, purpose, integrity, love. Sometimes I realized the greatest victory isn't in making others see your value. It's in creating a world where value is recognized naturally, where truth doesn't need to fight to be heard, where merit rises without artificial barriers. Mark had seen me as dead weight, but I had become a foundation upon which something better could be built, and that in the end was the most satisfying victory of all.